Hello. Today we're starting a series on Jupiter and the signs. Jupiter is usually described as luck, growth, expansion, and abundance. That's true, but it doesn't go far enough. In a chart, Jupiter shows how you grow beyond your current limits. It describes your instinct for expansion, your relationship to possibility, your beliefs about what life can offer you, and the way you move toward meaning, opportunity, and experience. It also shows how you handle increase, how you respond when life opens up, and how comfortable you are with taking up more space. This is why Jupiter is not only about luck. It's about perspective. It's about belief. It's about what you trust, what you expect, and what you think is possible for you. Two people can be given the same opening and respond in completely different ways. One leans in immediately and sees potential. Another hesitates, doubts it, or assumes it won't lead anywhere. That difference is not random. Jupiter explains it. The sign Jupiter is in shows how that expansion happens. It changes the tone, the direction, and the way growth expresses itself. Some Jupiter placements grow through action and risk. Others grow through patience and consistency. Some expand through knowledge, others through faith, others through relationships, others through testing limits and gaining direct experience. The same applies to success, confidence, and opportunity. Jupiter describes what you naturally place your faith in, where you tend to expect more, and where you may either overreach or hold yourself back. It often shows where life wants to open for you, and where excess, exaggeration, or misplaced confidence can create problems if the placement is not understood clearly. In the natal chart, the sign gives the style, the house shows the area of life, and the aspects modify how easily, strongly, or unevenly Jupiter operates. So this series focuses on the sign first. We're going to look at how Jupiter behaves in each sign, how it seeks growth, what it trusts, what it amplifies, and where it tends to create both opportunity and imbalance when it isn't handled consciously. No cliches, no flattened meanings, no easy one-word definitions, just how the placement actually works. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation with me if you want to understand exactly how this placement affects your personal chart. Jupiter in Gemini. Jupiter in Gemini grows through curiosity, exchange, and the constant movement of ideas. This is a placement that does not expand by staying in one fixed perspective. It explores, it questions, it connects different pieces of information, and sees what happens when they interact. Because Gemini is not concerned with reaching one final answer. It is concerned with understanding how things work from multiple angles. And when Jupiter is here, growth comes from engaging with variety, not limiting experience too quickly, not locking into one conclusion too early, moving, learning, staying mentally active enough for new possibilities to keep emerging. There is a natural instinct here to ask, to observe, and to respond quickly to what is happening in the environment. Something appears, and the reaction is interest. A new idea comes in, and the person wants to explore it. A conversation begins, and it often leads somewhere unexpected. This creates a different kind of momentum. And momentum here is flexible, fast, and constantly shifting. Because Jupiter in Gemini often learns by making connections between things that at first seem unrelated, not by following a single path from start to finish. This is one of its defining characteristics. Understanding comes through comparison. Clarity comes from seeing patterns across different experiences. Confidence builds through interaction, not isolation. That can make this placement adaptable, quick, highly responsive, but more accurately, it is comfortable navigating change without needing everything to stay fixed. And that opens doors. Opportunities tend to appear when the person is engaged in conversation, learning something new, or moving between different environments. Not when they are locked into one rigid system. Not when they stop asking questions. When they are mentally active. When they are curious. When they are open to information. This can create a life pattern where progress happens through networks, communication, and constant discovery. Because ideas create movement. Movement creates opportunity. And opportunity leads to expansion. Now, one of the strengths of Jupiter in Gemini is its ability to generate understanding. not just receive it. Generate it. It does not always need formal structure to learn. It can pick things up quickly. It can absorb information from multiple sources. It can synthesize ideas in a way that makes them useful. That makes it intelligent in a very dynamic way. Not static, but fluid. It does not require perfect conditions to gain insight. It creates understanding by staying engaged. And that is powerful, because many opportunities in life come from knowing how to think, communicate, and connect information effectively. Jupiter in Gemini does that naturally. It explores, it links, it translates, and through that, it often finds itself in the middle of movement, where new possibilities are constantly forming. There is usually a strong belief here in the value of information, a sense that if you understand enough, you can navigate almost anything. And very often that is true. This placement does not naturally assume that life should be approached with rigid certainty. It tends to believe that reality is flexible, that knowledge evolves, and that staying mentally open is more useful than clinging to fixed conclusions. And that worldview can create a very strong relationship with adaptability. You do not wait until you know everything. You learn as you go. You do not stay limited to one perspective. You explore different ones. That is very Gemini. And with Jupiter here, that instinct becomes larger, faster, and more central to the life path. Now, this is part of why Jupiter in Gemini can seem lucky. From the outside, people may say things like they always know someone or they always find a way. But a lot of that so-called luck comes from engagement, from staying connected, from talking, asking, sharing, and moving between spaces where information is exchanged. That matters because many opportunities in life come through communication, timing, and awareness. Jupiter in Gemini often places itself where those things are active, not by accident, by instinct, and sometimes that alone creates advantage. This placement also tends to have a strong relationship to variety, not in the sense of distraction alone, more in the sense that different inputs create better understanding. A situation becomes interesting when there is something new to learn. A goal becomes engaging when it allows flexibility. A path becomes meaningful when it keeps evolving. This is one of the reasons Jupiter in Gemini can become highly motivated when there is movement, conversation, or intellectual stimulation involved. It likes exploring. It likes discovering. It likes the feeling of connecting ideas in real time, of turning information into something useful, of seeing how different perspectives interact. But this is also where imbalance can appear. Because when variety becomes the default, focus can weaken, attention can scatter, interest can shift too quickly. The desire to explore everything can override the ability to commit to something long enough to develop depth. So one of the key lessons here is learning the difference between curiosity and distraction, because they are not the same. Curiosity creates understanding. Distraction avoids it. Curiosity expands awareness. Distraction disperses it. And Jupiter in Gemini becomes far more effective when it knows how to stay with something long enough to extract real value from it. That awareness matters, not because it should become rigid in a way that kills its natural flexibility, but because a little focus can make all that curiosity much more powerful. This placement does not need less movement. It needs meaningful movement. Movement that leads somewhere. Movement that builds on itself. Otherwise, life can become a series of interesting beginnings without enough continuity to create lasting results. A series of ideas that never fully materialize. A series of conversations that never turn into action. That can happen here. Because Gemini loves possibility. The new has energy in it. The unknown has energy in it. The exchange has energy in it. But staying with something after the initial curiosity fades can be harder if the person has not developed discipline alongside flexibility. So one important part of maturity with Jupiter in Gemini is learning that depth does not limit freedom. It enhances it. It is not enough to know many things. Eventually, the person has to learn how to apply what they know in a way that creates something real. How to move from information into understanding that can actually support life. Now, in terms of belief, this placement tends to trust adaptability itself. It believes that staying open is more useful than being certain. That communication creates solutions. That learning never really stops. There is often a strong sense that life responds to those who stay engaged with it mentally. And that belief can be very empowering. It creates flexibility. Because even when something changes, the response is not usually to freeze. It is to adjust, to rethink, to find another way. Difficulty here is often seen as something to figure out, not something to be overwhelmed by. And that keeps movement alive. There is often a refusal to stay stuck in one interpretation for too long. A refusal to believe that one answer is the only answer. The person may become restless, uncertain, or mentally overloaded, but those states often turn back into exploration rather than collapse. That is one of the hidden strengths of this placement. It restores clarity by engaging with information. It rebuilds direction by asking better questions, not necessarily by forcing certainty. Mental movement itself becomes part of the solution, but this can also create a shadow pattern, because if flexibility is always the answer, the person may avoid committing to anything that requires sustained attention. They may move on too quickly. They may replace depth with constant input, and eventually that can create repetition. The same idea in a different form. The same pattern of starting but not finishing. The same sense of possibility without fulfillment. So growth also involves learning that understanding is most valuable when it is integrated, not just accumulated. The lesson is not stop exploring. The lesson is use what you learn. Now, another important aspect of Jupiter in Gemini is how it relates to communication. This placement usually prefers interaction, the ability to exchange ideas, to speak, write, share, and respond. That does not mean it cannot be introspective. It can, but it tends to function best when there is some form of dialogue, even if that dialogue is internal. In environments where communication is active, it can thrive. It can connect. It can inform. It can translate complexity into something accessible. But in environments that are too silent, too rigid, or too limited in exchange, restlessness can build. Because this placement is not designed to stay mentally inactive. It is designed to engage. There is usually very little patience here for environments that shut down conversation, limit expression, or discourage questioning. That kind of atmosphere can make Jupiter in Gemini feel restricted, not because it cannot handle structure at all, but because structure without exchange feels empty to it. It needs some sense of movement, some ability to think out loud, some space to interact with ideas. Without that, motivation can drop very quickly. In work, Jupiter in Gemini often does well in roles that involve communication, learning, or adaptability. Writing, teaching, media, sales, marketing, languages, anything where information moves. Fields where interaction matters often suit this placement well. Even within structured environments, it tends to gravitate toward positions where it can think, communicate, and adapt rather than repeat the same static task indefinitely. Because stagnation is one of the few things that truly limits this placement. Not lack of ability, not lack of opportunity, stagnation. Now, another layer here has to do with perception. Jupiter in Gemini often gives the person a strong instinct to interpret quickly, but that perception is not always stable. Sometimes it comes out as insight. Sometimes it comes out as overthinking. Sometimes it comes out as, I see multiple possibilities. And surprisingly often that works. But perception here becomes much more powerful when it is anchored. Because there is a difference between awareness and mental overload. Awareness says, I can see what is happening. Overload says, everything is happening at once. That distinction matters because Jupiter amplifies. And in Gemini, it can amplify intelligence, but it can also amplify noise. The person may take in too much. They may process too many possibilities. They may move so quickly between thoughts that nothing fully settles. This is especially important in moments where clarity would come from slowing down, where focus would create direction, or where less input would actually produce better understanding. So one of the deeper tasks of this placement is learning how to keep its natural curiosity while creating enough structure to support it. Not less intelligent, not less open, just more centered. Now, in relationships, This placement tends to value communication, clarity, mental connection. It prefers interactions that feel alive, responsive, and engaging rather than static or emotionally heavy without explanation. There is often a desire for a connection that includes conversation, something that moves, something that evolves, rather than something that stays silent or undefined. It often appreciates people who can think, respond, and engage actively, who do not shut down dialogue, who do not expect connection to exist without communication. That can make this placement stimulating in connection, light, flexible, engaging in a way that keeps things interesting. But here again, balance matters, because the same need for movement can sometimes come across as inconsistency or as lack of depth. Not every connection needs constant change. Not every silence means something is wrong. So part of growth here is learning how to maintain that natural engagement while also allowing space for stability. Not losing interest the moment something becomes familiar. Not needing constant stimulation to feel connected. That is a major maturity point. Learning that communication is strongest when it is paired with presence. Otherwise, the person may keep things moving without ever letting them deepen. There can also be a strong attraction here to variety, intelligence, and stimulation in relationships. Something has to feel interesting. There often needs to be exchange. Not endless predictability, not emotional monotony, not a connection that stays in one state forever. Jupiter in Gemini usually wants relationship to feel like something is alive. That can be beautiful when it creates curiosity, openness, and shared exploration. But it can become unstable if the person starts confusing novelty with compatibility, or if they move on the moment something requires steadiness rather than stimulation. So once again, the lesson returns. Not every meaningful thing stays exciting in the same way forever. Some things become deeper, and the person has to learn how to recognize that. Now, one of the deeper themes with Jupiter in Gemini is understanding, because Gemini is connected to thought, to perception, to how reality is interpreted. And when Jupiter is here, growth is closely tied to becoming more aware of how meaning is created. Not just what is known, but how it is understood. This can be incredibly empowering because it places the source of expansion in the person's ability to learn, adapt, and communicate. Not outside, but it also requires responsibility because when you are constantly interpreting, you are also shaping how you experience life. This placement often learns that knowledge is not just information. It is perspective. And perspective changes everything. Because early on, Jupiter in Gemini can believe that more information always equals better understanding. Later, it often learns that clarity comes from integration, not accumulation. That knowing many things is not the same as understanding something deeply. That communication is not just about speaking. It is also about listening. This is where the placement becomes much more powerful. Because then intelligence is no longer scattered. It is directed, and directed intelligence changes everything. At its highest expression, Jupiter in Gemini does not just move between ideas randomly. It becomes insightful. It becomes articulate in a way that helps others understand what they could not explain before. It becomes the energy that connects information into meaning. The person who translates complexity into clarity. The one who helps others see connections they were missing. The one who keeps learning alive. That is one of the gifts here. It can bring movement into rigid thinking. It can restore curiosity where stagnation has taken over. It can cut through confusion by reframing it. It can remind people that sometimes the answer is not hidden in certainty. Sometimes the answer is in better questions. There is something deeply life-expanding about that. Because Gemini trusts inquiry. It trusts what happens when the mind stays open. It trusts that reality reveals itself to those who keep exploring it. And Jupiter here enlarges that trust. The person may become someone who connects not only ideas, but people. Someone who moves information in a way that creates opportunity. Someone who grows by engaging rather than withdrawing. That can make this placement highly dynamic when it is mature. Not because it settles into one final answer, but because it knows how to keep learning in a way that actually leads somewhere. At its best, Jupiter in Gemini creates expansion through curiosity, communication, and the ability to connect ideas in a way that keeps life moving. It opens paths by exploring them. It creates opportunities by engaging with them. It builds confidence by learning, not by assuming. And when this placement is working well, it does not just think quickly. It thinks clearly. It turns information into insight, curiosity into understanding, and flexibility into something that actually creates direction instead of confusion. It learns that intelligence is strongest when it is focused, that communication is most effective when it is grounded, and that the life it wants is rarely going to arrive through staying in one fixed perspective. It will arrive because it stayed open long enough to see what else was possible. And that is where its real strength comes from. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and book a consultation with me if you want to understand exactly how Jupiter in your chart is affecting you personally.